In today's episode, we're installing some DIY vents into the top of my guards. Now, if you remember last week, we were talking about the lower fender area or guard area here and how we cut it away and sort of evacuated air out of the wheel well. Well, the sort of next step to that is to install these vents, which I've designed myself and 3D printed into the top of the fender, something like that. So this should be a fairly straightforward process. I've already designed and printed my two vents and I've sort of got a rough idea on where I want to put them, somewhere over the wheel well here. But we need to now obviously cut a hole, mount these up, probably just glue them in place, and it should be a fairly easy thing to do. But let me get you started with showing you a bit about how I made these and then where we want to mount them. Now, the first thing I needed to do was work out exactly where I wanted to mount this thing. So I firstly just roughly marked out with pen and some masking tape this area here as a general idea on where I wanted to put things. I'll probably end up moving it a bit further forward, bit more with the center line of the wheel. I think that's sort of more appropriate. That seems to be where a lot of cars, you know, race cars, LeMans cars, they all seem to have the vent more of the center line of the wheel. So I'm going to move this forward about 3 or 4 inches. And then the next thing, of course, is to design up my vent. So I did that on the computer as always, 3D printed it out. And I took a few goes to get the sort of the contour or the curve of the guard, and I made it so that it was right on that sort of center line, the high point of the curve here, so that the same vent can be used on either side. I could print multiples and they'd go on either end. It was sort of mirrored or universal fit, which is a handy thing. So first things first, I'll clean up this old masking tape and mark out the new area that I want to mount the vent, and then I can mark out the hole and we can do some cutting. Rightio, so I've now got our new clean panel. First thing I'll do is I'll mark approximately the centre line of the wheel, and then we'll lay over the vent in the rough area that I'm thinking of mounting it. So the sort of the front edge of the vent is sort of in that centre line of the wheel. And I just need to work out where it sits relatively flat on the curve of the panel. Effectively the center of the vent should sort of sit on that highest point, or that highest point of the curve. There's a slight flat and a slight flat, and then there's a curve here in between that sort of the vent is being modeled to match that. So we're looking at somewhere around about there. So with my vent in place and it all looking about right with where it sits on the curve of the fender, I'll now just mark it out around the outside edge, and then I know I've got about 2mm around that, which I can come in. I'll cut the hole, and then hopefully we can mount the vent from underneath. If that doesn't work out, I can always just glue it on top as it is now. But from the underneath will probably give a better finish. So yeah, we'll mark it out and cut a hole. The line's marked. Got masking tape to mark out the hard line. I'm going to come in with my grinder, a couple of mil, all the way around, and try and do as straight a cut as I can. And yeah, let's get to it. Well, the main chunk of our hole is cut, and let's see how things fit. Looks like lengthwise we're okay, but we're a bit tight this way, and it doesn't quite want to come through. So we'll need to shave the top and maybe the bottom just a little bit, maybe straighten them up, they're probably a little bit wobbly, and then things should fit peachy. There we go. Fits like a glove. Well, that turned out pretty good. I ended up using the flapping wheel thingy on the grinder and the files, and got the hole about right, which wasn't too difficult. It looks pretty neat. It's nice and flush. Those curves that I made in the vents seem to match up nicely with the actual car, which is good. So now we'll need to clean up the edge. We'll probably maybe some touch-up paint just to prevent rust, and glue the thing in place. Now I should mention these vents are just simple PLA printed at I think about 0.2mm layer height. Because of their weird orientation, they're kind of tricky to print, and you know the sort of the shapes and things aren't really conducive to 3D printing. So I printed them actually like that, and then there were supports up between through the insides of the vents, which is a little tricky, but they turned out okay. Nothing special, no exotic materials, just normal PLA, and I'm quite happy with how PLA performs. It does a good job. It seems to last reasonably well, even in automotive use. I wouldn't use it in the engine bay or near the engine, but for something like this, it's not going to get a lot of heat or temperature or moisture or anything. The car might get driven in the rain, but I don't think it's going to hurt it too much. But nonetheless, I have hit it with a couple of coats of some clear acrylic paint just to sort of, I guess, protect it and maybe keep the UV off it a little bit. It should help it to sort of, weather a little better. I suppose if you really wanted to, you could, I don't know, body filler it and paint it. You could just paint it as it is. You could probably sand it down, and there's a few things you could do. You could also create molds off of this and go and make them out of, I don't know, composite materials, fiberglass, carbon fiber. But I think they're pretty much fine to use as they are. So yeah, look, I'm overall really happy with how they've turned out, and then reasonably lightweight. Probably lighter than the steel equivalent. Now this thing's going to need a little bit of a clean up around the edges because there's obviously pen marks and stuff still, but I'm going to leave it and let the glue dry before I go and play with it. And we can now go and do the other side. Well, there you go. The install of my homemade DIY 3D printed fender vents. They turned out pretty cool, fairly easy to install, just kind of hole in the fender and glue them in. Nothing special or exotic about it, and for the cost of maybe $30 in materials, they're they hopefully should be reasonably effective. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching. You can find us everywhere, BEAVIS Motorsport, Facebook, Instagram, all of that stuff. If you'd like to support me and support the channel, check out the website. We've got some awesome gear for sale, MX5 stuff, shirts, maintenance items. Check it all out, it's all there. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.